corner. Good morning, team. I didn't realize the lighting was so sucky. I was so busy trying to figure out stream connection and staying in a quiet place. Didn't realize I would have this light trouble, so that's why I'm a little late trying to figure it out. Not easy when you're going all around like this, right? But you're not here to hear about the production complaints, right? Who cares about production complaints? You're here, I think, for some confirmation of sunrise. We're good. We got a sunrise on the East Coast. We're all good. Bitcoin's running. All that's left for us to do is have a coffee, talk about what's new. Indeed. Good morning, Calcasa. How you doing, my man? Hope everything's good. Indeed. We got P-Man Van with a confirmation of sunrise. Indeed. Rickster Swickster with a good morning. Good morning, CK. Good morning, CK. CK, I'm going to tell you, the 16.9 aspect ratio on Midjourney for the thumbnails did not work. Did not work. Did not work. That's okay. Here for the coffee. Oh, that was the wrong one. It's not lining up. Indeed, here for the coffee. What's up at Consensus? Consensus is over. I was there for a few days. Check your chat filter to see all comments. The rain has stopped. The sun is up. Indeed, indeed. So let's talk about all the crazy stuff. So, as you know, we have a little challenge called the Moscow Time. Fakest news we can find. What do we got today? Well, New York State. I used to live there. I live on the border of New York State. I expect this stuff to come to my rural state of Vermont sooner or later. But look, we got to just give them credit. New York moves to become first state banning natural gas hookups. Quote, our budget prioritizes nation-leading climate action that meets this moment, Democratic Governor Hochul said. And not to be outdone, California doesn't want to be behind New York. Come on, California. Editorial in the Los Angeles Times, polluters keep trying to block gas bans. California cities shouldn't be deterred. I don't think they will be. I think they're going for it. Now, we're going to talk a bit about the correspondents' dinner, but I got to talk about another speech, and that's from Kamala Harris. It's something else. I'm gonna read it because it's amazing. It's too good. I wish I could write speeches this good. You couldn't, if you tried, write a speech this good. I'm not kidding. It's not possible to write a speech this good. Here's what she says. I think it's very important for us at every moment in time, and certainly this one, to see the moment in time in which we exist and are present, and to be able to contextualize it, to understand where we exist in the history and in the moment, as it relates not only to the past, but to the future. I personally believe that U.S. Americans are unable to do so because some people out there in our nation don't have maps. And I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere like such as, and I believe that they should, our education over here in the US should help the US, or should help South Africa, and should help the Iraq and the Asian countries, so we will be able to build up our future for our children. That's great. That's what we want to hear. That gives me a ton of confidence, just a ton of confidence in what's going on. Really a ton. I'm so glad. I'm so glad that these people are there. Now, there were more amazing speeches, really amazing speeches. They had the correspondents dinner this weekend. So that's where politicians and journalists hang out and they tell jokes and they laugh about stuff and everything's really funny and it's so great. And Joe Biden gave a speech, right? And Brian Stelter even took a quote out of it. And they said, my administration is here to send a message to the country and quite frankly, the world. A free press is a pillar, maybe the pillar of a free society, not the enemy. And then they actually gave an award to a Washington Post writer. And it was all about Joe Biden's Catholicism and what a good guy he is. And they actually had a thing written in the New York Times this weekend, kind of about it. Was related to it. So they, he had the thing this weekend, and it was great. A journalist won an award for what they said was really the best White House coverage, because he tapped into the president's Catholicism, and it was really deep, and it was great, right? It was awesome. Here's the New York Times article this weekend. Opinion: Joe Biden and the struggle for America's soul, for the soul of America. And David Brooks, who wrote the article, said the contest between Biden and Trumpism is less Democrat versus Republican or liberal versus conservative than it is between an essentially moral vision and an essentially amoral one, a contest between decency and its opposite. Yes, decency. Very important stuff. In other news, Red Steez wonders, and this is at Red Steez, his name is Stephen L. Miller. He was kind of commenting on the quality that we were just talking about, right? What a good guy, and less about liberals and more about decency and morality. So he says, ask Joe Biden on a debate stage how many grandkids he has, and then correct him when he says 6. You'll get a whole heap of decency thrown at you. And if you didn't know, Hunter's got a bit of an issue with one of the strippers that he had a kid with, because she's suing him now after the paternity test confirmed that Joe Biden, in fact, has a 7th grandkid, but the stripper is the mother. They're worried about the alimony now. So maybe it's just he doesn't want to comment on a live legal case. That could be it. Just could be a bit of that. Could be a bit of that. Who knows? What do I know about Joe Biden and his grandkids and decency? David Brooks knows more, apparently. Right? What a decent guy. We have a couple major updates on things that we've been tracking, and they're pretty important. So we're going to go over them. And the theme today is that you can really feel the energy shift after this week. And that correspondents dinner, I think, in so many ways, just encapsulated the degree to which reality has spun so far and is so estranged from what is a collective understanding of what's going on. Now, remember, one of the definitions of reality or truth that we're talking about here in the mornings came from, I was having that spaces thing. I've been going into the Mario Nawfal spaces. I've been invited around AI to talk several times now. And each time it sort of reverts into this question about truth and reality and what's going on and how do we define it, and can AI be conscious, and all of those questions. I've been tapping into the old David Deutsch definition of truth. And David Deutsch, if you guys don't know, is one of the original quantum cryptographers. He's the fellow who invented the concept of the multiverse, or the physical reality. He's a physicist, by the way, if you didn't know what he did. The quantum cryptography part is just something else he does. And the book that he's most famous for is called The Fabric of Reality. And in that book, The Fabric of Reality, you get his definitions of these things. And they're really tight. They're really good, and they're really useful. That's why I share them. So his definition of truth is hard to vary assertions about reality. The hard to vary part is really important, because that talks about entropy and words and their definitions and their capacity to decay over time. Just go back to Newtonian physics, for example. When Newton came up with a lot of that stuff, they were ironclad and there was no exceptions. And then, of course, Einstein came along and there were new exceptions, right? So the hard to vary assertions about reality changed, and they do change, right? That's the force of entropy that we're talking about. And then what he says is that the origin of all progress is the search and discovery of these hard to find assertions about reality. That's what allows us to put building blocks in, and one step above the other. False things, of course, can be defined by easily varied explanations. So if there's an easy variable, an easy way to discredit it, well, then you got a problem. And that's really where we are today, right? Both sides of the dichotomy, both sides of the conflict, both extreme polarities really have easy to vary opinions when it comes to arguing each other, and either side can have these, right? It gets pretty simple. I'm not saying one is more right, and I'm talking about liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican. In the end, it's looking more and more like, do you buy the official narrative or not, right? And so the schism between left and right seems more and more superficial, more and more fabricated, more and more synthetic, right? More and more manufactured than it ever was. And we can tell that just by looking at the press around the correspondents' dinner and how everyone else who isn't part of that official narrative um, um, collection of ideas simply thought they were crazy at that correspondence dinner, talking about some of the biggest nonsense you've ever heard. And so there were a ton of reactions to it, and they all kind of fit into the category of, do you buy the official narrative or don't you buy the official narrative? And a lot of that energy is shifting right now. There was a whole bunch of things, and those are the updates we're going to talk about today. Those are the things that are really starting to widen this gap even more. Eventually, if you think about the David Deutsch assertion that the truth is hard to vary assertions about reality, eventually things do have to collapse into one reality, simply because the variability of an assertion can become so demolished, so weakened by its propensity to be varied, to be changed, to be questioned, that you'll just have to have, in the end, most people collapse into one definition. Now, one of the most amazing things about this Epstein case, right? So the Epstein thing in the news again, the Epstein case really was, and everyone kind of felt it when it was all happening. There was something big behind it. There was something that indicated. I think now more than ever, we can clearly state that the secret keepers, the people who would want to keep narrative on the tracks, had to panic and had to deal with Epstein in a very sloppy way. So the new details are the names of the people who met with Epstein after he was arrested the first time, and before Mike Cernovich reopened the case and got him arrested a second time, which is where he was. Right. So remember, Mike Cernovich did that, by the way. No one gives him credit. That's Mike Cernovich all the way. He trained himself as a lawyer. People don't know these things about Mike Cernovich. He trained himself as a lawyer. And I'm going to bring up Cernovich towards the end of this again, because I have him conscripted in an idea that I have, and I think he can be really useful. So, people don't give Mike Cernovich enough credit for this stuff. Mike Cernovich is the first person to have abandoned Donald Trump as president in 2017, the moment Donald Trump sided too squarely with the GOP and the Republican Party and went into the GOP's legislative mandate and what does Paul Ryan think and what does Mitch McConnell want and da 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 da. So the minute Donald Trump did that, Cernovich abandoned him. A lot of people think of Cernovich as a lifelong or devout Trump supporter. People who don't follow Cernovich, if you follow Cernovich, you'll know that he was the first out of the club, right? Literally the first, even at a time when I was like, no, what are you doing, Cernovich? Like, you trust the plan, you know what I mean? Like, he's going to figure it out. And no, Cernovich was right the whole time, right? Cernovich has Trump figured out more than most. Now, you gotta, sometimes I do miss Trump. You gotta hear when you see something written that Trump said, and because he's not out there as much as he used to be, you kind of miss him for a second, right? Now, we're going to talk about presidential politics a little more today. Again, I think Trump was the greatest for like one day, right? We only needed him for one day. He broke enough brains and changed reality enough just by the act of getting elected and sitting as president for one day. I was a fan and more or less a supporter right up to the last day of his presidency. The last day of this presidency, he did something that I still have not forgiven him for, which is not pardon Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Ross Ulbricht, and others. He still is not 100% in my books, but he's still the funniest, one of the funniest writers. So I got to read what he said. He goes, "I will be retiring the name Crooked from Hillary Clinton," Trump said. "I'm going to give her a new name. I don't know, like maybe Lovely Hillary or Beautiful Hillary, but I'm going to retire the name Crooked so that we can use the name for Joe Biden, because he'll be known from now on as Crooked Joe Biden." It's good stuff. It's really good, right? It's so lively. We're speaking about energy today. Today is all about the energy shift, and you still got to hand it to Trump. He knows where the energy is, and he absolutely is able to capture it in the way he writes and the way he describes people. Now, I know it's a bit of a retread, but it's a good one. And remember how he was able to, I've mentioned it several times, he was able to contract Crooked Hillary to just Crooked. You know how good you have to be at branding and all that kind of stuff, that you can turn someone's name into just Crooked and we know who you're talking about, right? Crooked. we knew. So he's gone back to that old favorite, and that should be cool. But let's get back to the Epstein thing. So Epstein is let me get the notes here. I got the Bhutan stuff, which we're going to talk about. Here we go. Where is my Epstein stuff? I must have copied it. Oh, here we go. Did I not get it? Well, maybe I did not put it in my files properly. Hold on a second here. Committee Hassan. Yeah, I must have not put it in there. Just give me 1 minute here. So, not Eric Weinstein, but his brother, Brett, says this. It was an important quote. Pardon me for taking time to get it. He goes, Epstein is the X factor. We can't analyze Bill Gates' behavior because we don't know if Gates is doing things for his own reasons or he's a puppet of something else, fully compromised by compromat. Same for many with power and influence. Analysis is now all but impossible. Epstein was clearly an asset of one or more intelligence agencies, whether they created, adopted, or co-opted him. They ended him to avoid exposure, but that's much less important than his ongoing legacy of compromat. We can't understand the present or navigate our future this way. And if you see the names of the people who met him after Cernovich, after he was arrested and Cernovich got him back in jail, in that period in between. So it's the CIA director, right? CIA director William Burns, someone from Goldman, who I don't know their name, Catherine Rumler, but it sounds important, Noam Chomsky, a Kissinger consultant, a Rothschild, and others met with sex offender Jeffrey Epstein in the years after his conviction. Oh, there's the quote. I did have it indeed. How can I miss that when it's right in front of me? So, so when we talk about the energy shifting, right, we can see the contrast that the White House dinner created, right? So you get Joe Biden up there projecting, saying it's a free press that we need, and that's the whole thing. And you get Biden even making a joke. In a lot of ways, this dinner sums up my first 2 years in office. I'll talk for 10 minutes, take 0 questions, and cheerfully walk away. Stephen L. Miller says, ha ha ha, fuck you, he laughed as he shoveled dog shit into their mouths while they happily told him to keep doing it. Right? So we're getting a bit of anger out there, but that's probably a good thing, right? Because it's this contrast that's now becoming so laughable, right? So laughable. You get all of these people talking about Epstein this weekend, but what do you find in the official narrative, right? What do you find in the official narrative? Well, you find in the official narrative of this week, no mention of my notes are not the same when I don't have my big notebook. You find no mention of Epstein in mainstream stories, right? You find no mention of Robert F. Kennedy accusing the Democrat Party of rigging the primary. You find no stories around the seized biolab in Sudan. You find no stories about the following, which we covered. The whistleblower who planned to reveal information on the Biden family's corruption. Remember that guy? Gal Luft? Remember Gal Luft? The guy who was an Israeli fella, who said he had all the dirt on the Bidens, and then they arrested him in Cyprus with a charge that he is a weapons dealer, and he made a pretty believable denial. I unequivocally say I have never been involved in any of this arms dealing stuff, and he laughed and he said it's pretty scary because if they can do that to him, then there's a problem. So that guy, the whistleblower who was arrested, so taken into custody, one can imagine, saying that he has actual information on the Biden family corruption. Well, where's he gone? Nobody knows. He's just disappeared, right? So breaking. Whistleblower Gal Goof, Dr. Gal Goof, ready to reveal explosive information on Biden family corruption, has miraculously disappeared. He's just gone. So he's just gone. Now, we don't know where he's gone. We've made comments about it before. We've covered it here on this show. We still don't know what's true, right? We're in a fog of war situation. And Joshua Steinman puts that into context. And this is what he says. And I think this is good advice going forward now. This is where we're at, right? So remember, what we're seeing here is the energy shift from Biden's, Epstein, the official narrative, lacking any consistency. If we are talking again about hard to vary assertions about reality and falsities being easy to vary assertions, well, we are seeing narrative collapse. We are seeing perhaps the most important shifts in getting people away from these two polarities and things collapsing into something that looks more like truth and reality, something where we get more like an agreement on things, where we're more aligned and more less polarized, more aligned, right? So this is what he says. Joshua Steinman, this sets up an interesting dichotomy between those who yearn to accept establishment narratives and those who believe they have been lied to. Memetic terrain for the next 18 months. Food, disease, wars, the environment, energy. It's going to be a wild ride. Now, what do we talk about in Bitcoin world, right? Food and disease? Well, put that into health, right? Put that into health. We think about that in terms of health, right? Food and disease. We're constantly of the mind that the best healthcare is a good diet and exercise. And so disease being a byproduct of lack of exercise and a bad diet and a bad environment, right? So very important. Wars, of course, right? What are we always concerned about in the Bitcoin world? The war machine and its fuel, the fiat currencies that help perpetuate it, being one of the least wayfinding systems we've got as a society, one that just leads us to the same inevitable centralization of powers and all the trouble that we've come to know in the world today. And of course, energy, right? What's going on with energy? And more we see the split between, the Germans who celebrate nuclear plants getting shut down and Bitcoiners who understand that we need to finance the creation of way more of these in order to get out from under the yoke of the fiat symbiosis with the oil industry. So, and although we love oil, right? We're not anti-oil. We're not anti-oil. We just don't like the symbiotic relationship and the codependent relationship between the petrodollar, the war machine, and its monopolistic approach to the energy matrix, which is to heavily favor the useful attributes of oil. So, all of this means that if we start putting if we start putting that filter on it, the contrast is one of the best ways of finding a way forward, accepting an opinion, accepting a new opinion. When you see vivid relief, and that's what we do here every day on the show, right? We're talking about contrasting clown world with the world Bitcoin is building. Instead of telling you, oh, Bitcoin is 21 million coins and it settles and it's fast and da-da-da-da, what we like to do is contrast it, right? So contrast is a better way, I think, of persuading people than just a laundry list of facts and a bill of sale, basically, right? I'm not hitting, all the attributes about Bitcoin. I'm already assuming you know them, so that's another reason why I'm not selling the attributes of Bitcoin just consistently on a daily basis, and I'm instead talking about the contrast between Clown World and Bitcoin as a way to say, well, Clown World doesn't really have anything to offer, and Bitcoin has a lot to offer, therefore it's more attractive, right? So we use contrast for all kinds of things. I use it here. Lots of people use it, and it's just a persuasive way of getting to a point other than arguing the literal attributes or facts, right? So contrast really works. And the contrast we're starting to see with those who accept the narrative and those who don't is really what Bitcoin can surf on top of from this point on, right? We heard earlier that even when we were talking about the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and you saw that New York Times article trying to focus on decency, right? Well, if you choose that frame, you can die by that frame, of course. Like I said, Joe Biden has an illegitimate, unacknowledged grandchild. Not so decent, right? So if we're talking about decency, right, you've got to take those things into account. Of course, we're seeing the contrast now with the news outlets that won't talk about Epstein, right? We've been talking about that for a long time here. But there's one more, and we've mentioned it many, many times, and it seems to me like it's going to be one of the most important ways of and one of the principal ways in which Bitcoin will enter the main stage for the US presidential elections in 2024. And we're already seeing that energy shift, and this is what it looks like. It is the RFK candidacy as well as the Vivek Ramaswamy candidacy. Both of them combined have created a situation where there is a new middle ground that contrasts with and middle ground is not exactly the way to say it. There's a new option, right? Just like Bitcoin is not a middle ground, it's a third rail. It's another way to see things. We tend to see in an era of extreme polarity something that is a third rail, another option, an off ramp, a way out as a middle ground, just because it sort of makes sense if you line them up that way. It doesn't mean it's measured, or it could be extreme in some ways, right? Bitcoin is an extreme response. Let's not forget, right? Bitcoin is a complete reversal of polarity from what we've known with the fiat system. It's completely different than anything that's come before, and it's very difficult to just say it's a middle ground between left and right politics. Of course, it's something totally different, right? And in so many ways, RFK and Vivek Ramaswamy are just totally different, right? Hard to even put them in the middle. When you hear RFK talk about a Kennedy Democrat, you think of it as someone who's not as extreme as a woke Democrat or something like that, right? And that's accurate. That's one way of seeing it. But it's also just something totally new, right? It's an energy shift to something that we have never seen before, something that is a compilation of many different parts of the electoral landscape in America, but that is totally new. And so if you have a look at what, let me find the piece here. I did not get these into the right order for some reason today. Well, anyway, so you've already got the idea anyway that, and it looks like the attack vector on RFK going forward, because now he's polling much higher than people say, right? Look, compare his poll numbers. People have been comparing them to DeSantis. Everyone says, oh, DeSantis has a chance of beating Trump, but RFK has no chance of beating Biden. And they're rigging the thing, right? They moved the first primary from New Hampshire to South Carolina, so that's a problem for Kennedy. He probably would have won the New England primary to get started, and would have brought some momentum, which would have had an effect on narrative. So immediately that was changed, and now we have this new situation. But remember, they're going to try to call him a conspiracy theorist. Now, what I keep saying to anyone who says, oh, he's a conspiracy theorist, he's an anti-vax person. Okay, well, if your father was killed, and then your father's killer was killed immediately, and then your uncle was killed, and your uncle's killer was killed, and your uncle's killer's killer was killed, you get to ask questions. You don't have to buy the official narrative. You are completely free in that instance to be the one person in the world who can ask questions and not be called a conspiracy theorist. Of course, it's impossible, right? Of all the people who have a motivation, who have a right to ask questions, it's for sure RFK, for sure. So here he is asking important questions about the vaccines, important questions about healthcare, important questions about the health of young people. And the more and more people treat him on the Democrat Party and in the mainstream media as this conspiracy theorist, I think the more attention he's going to get. The energy is certainly shifting to him this weekend. Think about how much news he made this weekend, right? He made news for getting censored on ABC, Then he made news for sending the correction to, apparently there's a legal statute out there that says you cannot censor presidential candidates. I didn't know that. And he says what they did is just illegal. And they did it in front of everyone, right? They bragged about it in their broadcast. Now, I mean, obviously he's got to sue ABC News for this and try and get a bunch of money from that. That would help the campaign, I'm sure, and would give more attention. So we're in a situation here where the energy is shifting to someone who seems to understand that and is getting more and more energy. Now, we can all predict from here that you're going to hear some of the worst things. The worst things are going to be coming out about RFK soon, because what he's doing is very dangerous. Now, remember what they did to Trump. When Trump first started, it was the same deal, right? You saw this candidate who had all this energy and was totally different, and no one had ever seen him before. People laughed at first and said, no chance, not going to happen. He's an idiot. He's not serious. But the minute when people saw he was serious, that's when you got the opposition research. That's when you got the attack. That's when you got people going after him for being all this stuff, right? I remember in the summer of 2015, I was on my honeymoon, and I, obviously on my honeymoon, did not read any news, was not involved in anything going on, just totally checked out of all mainstream media. And when I got back, people were saying, oh, the Trump campaign imploded. It was the worst. He's done, right? And this was like August 2015. And that was like my first day back. So I started reading around. I was like, what do you mean he imploded? I see nothing but gaining energy, gaining momentum. People laughed at him. People called him a bunch of names, but that just added to the pile of energy that he was gathering. So the more people were laughing about him, the more people dismissed and said, it's over, right? I remember people in that August was, it's done, right? He's crazy. You're going to start hearing those same kinds of attack ads about RFK coming up. He's about to enter his summer before the election opposition research attack cycle. So you're going to hear the craziest stuff about RFK coming out, just nuts. It'll be awful. It'll be awful, 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 I'm sure. Probably all of it's untrue. Now, maybe some of it will be true. Who knows? I don't know anything about RFK's entire life, right? But I remember someone in the comments said that RFK was anti-nuclear. He might have been at one time. But I would take any assertion today that he's completely anti-nuclear power as probably an old quote taken from a long time ago, dusted off and turned into a current attack vector. That's just what I think. I'm almost positive he will embrace nuclear technology, especially small modular nuclear reactors. But who knows, right? We don't want to put too much faith in politicians, right? We are, as Bitcoiners, completely third rail. So we're not relying on these people to fix systems. We think they're breaking without any of our help. And most of them are beyond repair. Ergo why RFK has already embraced Bitcoin, already sounded the alarm bell on the future of CBDCs and what they constitute, what they mean, what they could be. So RFK did get an important endorsement from David Sachs, right? So this weekend, David Sachs saying that he's endorsing RFK for the Democrat nomination. You did get Chamath saying something ridiculous in response that probably wasn't very strong in the case of let me here have the quote. Again, we were talking about the memetic terrain, right? The food diseases from Joshua Steinman, right? Talking about how indeed the attack vector on RFK is going to be all about RFK being a conspiracy theorist. So Joshua Steinman goes on to say, if you want to know where I saw this first, it was Chamath's comments on this week's All In Pod. So arguing with David Sachs about this stuff. You can get early previews of Democrat Party talking points about 72 hours ahead of time by listening to him every week. The DNC is concerned about RFK Jr. Indeed, where you get my prediction now that you're going to hear way more opposition talking points. Chamath Palihapitiya, Ollie. Chamath, pardon me, I don't mean to screw up his name. I was supposed to interview him several times, and he dropped out each time. In 2017, I was supposed to interview him, but he was undergoing a public divorce, and it was, I guess, he didn't want to be in public. And the second time would have been, I think, in 2021, maybe 2022, I don't remember. A Bitcoin guy, yeah, the Bitcoin guy. I don't know about that, Ollie. I wouldn't call Chamath a Bitcoin guy at all. He's the furthest thing from a Bitcoin guy that I would think of. And it's that's what I'm hearing. Yeah, they were calling him conspiracy theorist. Yeah, yes, Ollie. That so in the back and forth, you had David Sachs saying he endorses him, and Chamath saying conspiracy theorist. Right. So remember, the conspiracy theorist is going to be the way they attack him. But of all people on Earth who have an excuse to not be a conspiracy theorist, you got RFK, and he's winning on that one, right? That's where I'm coming from on this. So yeah, Chamath, not a Bitcoin guy, more or less saying that RFK is a conspiracy theorist and is not going anywhere, and trying to poo-poo him. And Joshua Steinman took it from there, right? If you can beat him in poker, he will talk to you. If you could beat him. Chamath bought, and what sounds like a drone, he bought women worth and forgot about it. His words. Yeah. I should call him the Bitcoin flip-flopper. Yeah. Well, I will say he was early to Bitcoin, and there was a famous party. If you read Nathaniel Popper's, what was it called again? Something about digital gold. It's a good book. It was a book on Bitcoin written by a New York Times writer in 2016. And I've known Nathaniel Popper. I've met him a few times. No reason to believe he's captured or anything like that. He was just an honest writer, as far as I could tell, trying to do his best. And he was skeptical. That's what you want, right? We don't want writers that come from mainstream media to just be cheerleaders for Bitcoin. He did his best. And the book that he wrote, I thought, was fair. I liked it, and he captured the essence of several people that I know personally, and I thought it was a fair shake and a good book, for the time anyway. So Nathaniel Popper, who was as I said, the New York Times correspondent in the early years of Bitcoin, and who had a very positive relationship with CoinDesk when I worked at CoinDesk, and we could reach him anytime. We could tell him if coverage was poor. Where his blind spots were, very open to that kind of stuff. So Chamath was there was an early party in Silicon Valley, which is covered in the book Digital Gold. And it's where Chamath and others were just like marveling at the magic of Bitcoin, sending Bitcoin to each other, everyone whipping Bitcoin around the party on their phones and things like that. So he had some early role, you got to hand it to him. I also don't think Chamath is necessarily captured. I think he's bought up into this narrative and maybe lacks imagination to forecast how much the world is changing. He probably has a more. I'm doing mind reading right now, so this is absolutely mind reading, right? So don't take what I'm saying as any form of argument and knowledge against Chamath. It is my impression and my best guess at what he's thinking. Therefore, it is mind reading and not a real argument. All right. So my guess is that he just sees incremental change going forward, and that society won't fork entirely, and that it will just have an incremental change, and you live with what you've got and try to change it slowly, right? But I'm an accelerationist, as I've been accused of being lately because of all these bank things, like First Republic that we heard in the news this weekend, another bank going bankrupt. It's like my whole thing on crypto, and I'll always go back to this, having been at CoinDesk's event last week, and as being a self-advertised Bitcoiner. People say, well, you're Bitcoiner, what about crypto? I always take a different approach than a lot of Bitcoiners. I am interested in growing the scam that is Ethereum into a much bigger scam so that it can take Wall Street down. Right? Crypto is the best Trojan horse to destroy Wall Street by destroying itself simultaneously. But the whole concept of speculators and financial engineers becoming computer engineers and mixing the skills of financial engineers and computer engineers, and then that's the future. Nope. I say stick the computer engineers on a one-way rocket ship into Wall Street and see what happens, right? Instead of arguing about, oh, you shouldn't be like that or this and this, send them in and destroy it, right? We want a world where people go back to making chairs and farming and having all those things. So, that's just been my approach for a long time. I think that's the best way forward, and it's one of those contrast things again, right? You can get a lot of contrast that way. But there you go. Anyway, don't want to spend too much time. The Bitcoin flip-flopper, yeah. I see RFK's return to sanity. The divergence has been the last 60 years or so. Yeah, Ollie, the divergence seems to be from the moment they killed his uncle. I mean, the moment they killed his uncle, that's where you see the weaponization of and the deputization of the banking sector, right? So a lot of people don't realize this, but then, even if you take a fourth turning frame of history, right? A fourth turning frame of history. So in a fourth turning frame of the last 80-year cycle, breaking up the 80 years into 20-year history blocks, the first 20-year history block would have begun at the end of the Second World War and ended when JFK was killed. And so 1964 is really the beginning. So he's killed at the end of 63, and then it was November, and you can just it was just a national mourning until 64. By February 64, the Beatles arrive and the whole world starts changing. You get the Goldwater Republicans that now enter the presidential race against LBJ. LBJ, who has become president of the United States, he immediately launches the Gulf of Tonkin false flag, which forces us into the Vietnam War. Vietnam really gets going in 64, and protests start getting in 64, which is when authorities start deputizing banks to become police, really, of financial flows and who's funding protest and all that stuff. So they start spying on the money. They start spying and deputizing banks to help police in 1964. Before that, that relationship really didn't exist. From 64 on, you start getting surveillance in banking. So a lot of people say, what happened in 1971? Because that's the end of the gold standard. What happened in 1971 is a result of what happens in 1964, because the politicization of the US dollar and the banking system begins there. Bank Secrecy Act begins there. And if you talk to Caitlin Long, who I was with in the green room last week in Austin, Texas, and was saying hi and chatting with her, she's been of the mind forever that the most important thing Bitcoiners need to focus on in terms of laws is the Bank Secrecy Act, which started its process in 1964. I don't think it became law until 67 or something, but it was a LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson initiative, right? And if you believe Roger Stone, if you believe President Richard Nixon, you will know that LBJ probably killed JFK, right? That's the going theory. Probably the most accurate one out there. You can read, and lots of people have discussed it. Epsilon Theory has discussed it. Many people have discussed that thing. We've discussed it on previous episodes and mornings here together, that's likely what happened. Now, we don't have proof, but the official narrative, of course, is a scam. And the one that seems the least variable, the least prone to variation, the least hard to vary is this vice president who got the vice presidency despite being one of the most powerful people in DC. And of course, if you don't know the history and roles in American politics, the vice president is particularly weak and useless. They don't do anything. It's one of these neutered positions where you just sit and wait, and that's your job. Get busy waiting. Perfect for our lovely Kamala Harris and her beautiful speeches, right? It's more for that. So like, she's perfect. She's a perfect vice president. Nothing wrong with her as vice president, right? So those speeches just, they're hard to beat. They're so great, and that's all you need them for. So the contrast now between what we see in official narratives, what we see with Biden, and he's such a swell guy, and there's nothing to see with the banks, and there's nothing to see with the energy, and there's nothing to see with this stuff, contrasts perfectly with what we see with RFK. Now, here's the other one. Look at Vivek this week. And I'm talking about energy shifts, right? The contrast and the energy shift. Here's what Vivek has to say. So here's one of his quotes. Reform isn't enough. I will shut down the Department of Education and Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Will cut headcount at the U.S. Federal Reserve by 90%, greater than 90%, and will replace the FBI with something from scratch. 8-year term limit for bureaucrats, end of the permanent state. What do we say here on the show all the time? That we basically left the war machine from World War II running. We never shut anything off. Vivek is the first person clearly calling for this stuff to be shut off. Now, you can do the Trump method, drain the swamp, right? What's drain the swamp? Like, get a few of the people out? He never did it. Vivek just has the most simple approach here. Just 90%. Just fire all of them, right? Who cares which ones are good and narrative, blah, blah, blah. Get rid of it. Shrink it down to nothing. And so you get Vivek with a real energy shift type of approach. Very simple for people to understand. Liquidate DC. Just liquidate it, right? Get rid of DC. You don't have to change any laws. You don't have to really get too involved in much. You just have to start shrinking the size and the footprint of everything in DC by drastic amounts, and you will have drained the swamp, right? Now, Trump illusion was beautiful, but it lacked detail. It lacked all follow through. He had 4 years to do it and did nothing. He did nothing. What did he do to get rid of these people? He let them set him up for now being known as an insurrectionist and all these other things. But it's his fault. He didn't do it. He had 4 years. You can tell me, oh, and it's true. It's true. If, he says he didn't blow the whistle on the JFK documents and the Warren Commission and all that, because his exact quote to Judge Napolitano, or whatever his name is, was simple. If you would have seen what I've seen, you wouldn't have said it. Well, what does that mean? They're going to kill him and his family because they already killed the president? Maybe, but but how can you, as the only person who could have stopped it, if it is that bad, as the only person who could have stopped it, and you can't stop it once you get this scenario take place where the narrative control takes power again and can foreclose on any future deviations to the narrative, then you've got a major problem on your hands. And that was sort of just ignored, right? That was just ignored. So you get Vivek now coming in to put, I think, what are really clear policy proposals down on paper that here's another one. Day one executive orders, right? Day one, this is the kind of blunt language he's using. End affirmative action in federal government and for contractors. End federal mandates to ensure carbon emissions. Abolish federal employee unions. Order 50% headcount reduction in every federal agency. The frame we have been talking about here, and the frame going forward, is that we're going to shrink the fictional construct that is the federal government in Washington, D.C., and the states will assume more sovereignty, that we're going to change things from, and we've talked about the one-word change in the history of American politics. It'll go from pre-Civil War, the United States are plural, right? We thought of them all as countable nouns, 1 state, 2 states, 3 states, 4 states. The United States are. And then after the Civil War, it became the United States is, because it started to be seen as one country, right? One country. I was just in Texas. Texas is an exception to that. They think of themselves as a nation within a country. Texas and my home state of Vermont are the only 2 states that joined America as nations. They were countries before they joined. That's why we have our own constitution. That's why in Vermont, we have constitutional guarantees of farmers being able to sell their product direct. We don't have to use federal inspection for cattle or food. As long as the farmer sells direct to consumers, we have our local inspections, which are, is that farmer clean or not? I'm on the farm. I can tell if I'm going to eat this stuff. I can have a look at the meat that I'm buying right there. So you don't need any of that stuff, right? We can buy constitutional guarantees in Vermont to raw milk. So cool, because Vermont joined the Union as a country, and Texas joined the Union with a constitution of its own and as a nation to begin with. So the correct way to view the United States, because every other state was either one of the original 13 or created to a form, or were created by a formula, which was it becomes a territory once population reaches a certain density or a certain critical mass. They appeal to DC for statehood, and then they become a state, and then all the pieces are put in place according to kind of a paint by numbers system, which is great, right? But they don't come into it with the full knowledge that they are individual nations. The truth is, each state is an individual nation within the country, and these states all have sovereignty, which they fail to exercise regularly. And so the world we're heading into goes from the United States are, Civil War, United States is, World War II, the Fed is. It even changes from being United States. The plurality of it goes away, right? The Fed Reserve, the federal government, the military, any of the federal institutions that are there is, right? Singularly plural now. We're moving to a rebalance here where we're going to start hearing the United States are. And the distasteful way that DC has been behaving, the terrible narrative control instituted from the polarity and energy coming out of DC for years, will be pushed back upon when you start hearing about all the things we think about ourselves as Americans is a lie. It's a lie. Unfortunately, a lot of it is just not true. The many of the things we love about ourselves as Americans is true, right? There is a real spirit. American exceptionalism is a real thing. Beautiful and magical things can happen in America and will continue to happen in America. But this idea that we've created that the democratic institutions of America are singularly unique and have been the great purveyor and spreader of freedom and democracy in the world is going to be retracked right to its source of fiction. It is an easy to vary assertion. It is false. It is not a hard to vary assertion about reality at all. It's the easiest thing to vary because you can see the evidence. You can see Guatemala, you can see all these, you can see Chile, you can see the Middle East, you can see all of these historic, difficult situations America has found itself in and has never behaved in the way that Americans who believe in the potential for America would recognize, right? The people who are so patriotic and willing to live, to give their lives, wouldn't do so if they really knew the truth, right? It would be a different story. So I continue to predict we're going nowhere near Ukraine to fight. We're going nowhere near Taiwan to fight. Taiwan is China's. Forget it, guys. It's not happening. We're not going there, right? I mean, the best we can do is follow Vivek's advice, which is to arm them all with guns and give them a taste of American exceptionalism that way, right? That's probably our best bet, that America is held within the hearts of each Taiwanese person, not as a policy of the federal government to come with our aircraft carriers. We're not doing it. We're not. It's just not going to happen, right? Too bad for some people, but it's not going to happen, right? It's just not. So we're left in this scenario where the official narrative has now never seemed, in contrast to what we're finding out, never seemed more ridiculous. And here's another update I want to give, because this is one that I didn't quite know how to handle from the start. If you remember, we were following War Clandestine very closely, right? War Clandestine. And he's been saying that you can actually track the gain of function finance to Fauci and the Wuhan lab eventually to Fauci as well. And that Russia and China have been saying for a long time that Ukraine and all of this was about bioweapons, and that these countries have been accusing America of creating COVID-19 in Wuhan, not Chinese, right? So I don't know the answer to that. I'm just saying what War Clandestine has been saying. You had another fellow named Andrew Huff, right, who came out, and I said when this started to happen, they started to fight. War Clandestine and Andrew Huff started to fight. And at that time, I said, we're going to fog a war. We're going to back up a little bit. And I don't know what's happening here. But now I think we know. Jordan Schachtel, who will be a speaker at Bitcoin 2023 in Miami, May 18th to 20th. Just 2 weeks away, but more or less. I'll be there in 2 weeks. Turns out he's a big liar. Andrew Huff's a big liar. And war clandestine not. And I think one of you even sent me your opinions on it based on who was hallucinating, which is excellent work on deciphering who has cognitive dissonance. So I think it was Daniel sent me the thing that contrasting who's hallucinating a thing that isn't there, right? That's a really good way to determine who's lying in one situation. If you take two stories, right, two people disagree about something, if one person has added physical facts, has added things onto the story, usually it's not there. If someone missed something, could be an honest mistake. But if you added a detail to make your side of the story true, probably false. Not every time, but as a rule, you can use that as a system. Anyone who's hallucinating a new fact into reality without really much evidence, if they use mind reading, if they use whatever creative way to add another dimension to it and it's a hallucination, probably the wrong one. And so someone mentioned that they'd seen this Andrew Huff guy hallucinating in debating with war clandestine. And in this case, I think it was that war clandestine had done something or he thought he knew what was going on in war clandestine's mind or whatever. So it looks like now we don't know if war clandestine is right, but we know that Andrew Huff's assertions about him are completely false. So Jordan Schachtel did a long investigation. You can go check it out on his Substack. It says, Lab Leak Whistleblower unmasked as serial fabulist. Andrew Huff has invented endless tales of Jason Bourne-like encounters with federal agents and Chinese spies. Is he telling the truth? And it turns out he's not. So Jordan Schachtel with that good piece of journalism. I think we can move back to seeing war clandestine as a credible source. And so I do have a quote from him today because it's relevant and with all that's going on and all the things we're seeing. So it turns out that Elon Musk has pointed to this same story about where the viruses come from, right? Who created them, the Ukraine biolabs, who's funding them, Fauci, what's going on with all that. That's been war clandestine's assertion. War clandestine has been arguing for a long time that COVID was an American creation. Again, I don't know. No idea, right? We're just saying what other people are saying and trying to judge whether or not with our simple filters, whether or not it seems credible and can pass on to another day of being contemplated until more information comes, right? So here's what Matt Wallace first says. Why do Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci keep funding extremely dangerous biolabs in the most volatile countries? Because now we're talking about the Sudanese one, right? The Sudanese story, which you didn't hear about all week. Right? You didn't hear anything about the Sudanese one. So Elon Musk says, I mean, what if something went wrong? So he's pointing at it, right? So War Clandestine says, Elon functions as the world's most effective laser pointer, using his influence to direct the public in the direction of truth. Slowly but surely, the public are seeing the vastness of the deep state biological network. The granddaddy of all crimes is coming to the surface. And even this conversation that Elon had with Bill Maher over the weekend, very important, right? Clandestine mentions Elon and Maher highlight how the modern left have isolated themselves from centrist, moderate, classical liberals. The left-wing movement has been hijacked by psychopaths. And you get that contrast, right? When you heard the Kennedy Democrat name, I said you would see contrast. You would see division amongst the Democrats, right? You would see division amongst the Democrats. So all of this to say, right, the point of everything that I'm saying here is that the contrast that we're seeing with this narrative exposure between narrative control, narrative sanctity, consistency versus this new chaotic form of trying to make sense of the world with all of the lies and the psyops, with what Joshua Steinman said, our memetic ability now to navigate this stuff. And again, you know, his comment indeed about memetic warfare, right? What he says is memetic terrain for the next 18 months: food, disease, wars, the environment, energy. Right? Those are his that's his contrast. And indeed, RFK is going to force this contrast. The more the attack trajectory is that he is a conspiracy theorist, the more we're going to see the official narrative put side by side. Side by side is what's important. That's where you get the contrast with what all of these other people are saying. And indeed, I'll reiterate what Joshua Steinman says. This sets up an interesting dichotomy between those who yearn to accept establishment narratives and those who believe they have been lied to. And so that memetic terrain that I'm mentioning is what is going to lead us to talk about Bitcoin and only Bitcoin as we lead up to the 2024 presidential election. The whole story is going to fold into Bitcoin, and it's going to be the most talked about thing in the world by the time we reach this 2024 election. I don't think you can stop talking about it. And now you even get countries like Bhutan, right? Did everyone see what was going on with Bhutan this weekend? So Bhutan is now been mining Bitcoin. There's a Forbes article, the tiny kingdom of Bhutan secretly held millions of dollars worth of cryptocurrencies. Turns out it's a lot of Bitcoin. Ian Martin says the exact scale of Bhutan's crypto mining operation still hasn't been disclosed, but important records show something very unusual. In a normal year, the country's inbound trade is dominated by gasoline, steel, and rice. Now, processing units, microchips, are its most valuable import. And it turns out that they imported, so last year was 142 million in computer chips, or 2 years ago, by Bhutan, accounting to around a tenth of the 1.4 billion in inbound trade. So 15% of the government's $930 million annual budget. So they spent 15% of the government's budget. 15% of the government's budget was spent on microchips to mine Bitcoin this year. Bhutan also imported 51 million of chips in 2021. By comparison, Bhutan custom officials reported just 1.1 million of these chips were imported in 2020. So it went from 1.1 million in 2020 to 51 million in 2021 to 142 million in 2022. Bhutan's Ministry of Finance noted that the country's yawning balance of payment deficit was partially due to a spending on these processing unit imported by Druk Holdings for special projects. So it looks like that's what's going on. Druk and Holding Investment is the government-owned fund that manages Bhutan's hydro dams, airline, and local cheesemaker. We revealed earlier, this is still from Ian Martin, this month that Druk was sued by BlockFi for over a secret $30 million USDC loan that had been foreclosed. Side note, there was some back and forth over whether the $2.9 billion fund can be considered a sovereign wealth fund. Druk is now on record as holding an investment portfolio of global equities, fixed income, and venture capital investments. So there you go. Looks like this stuff is happening, and a country is betting, a real country is betting that the fight around narrative control and the US's ability to have consistent energy policies in order to strengthen the US dollar as the world currency of trade and the global reserve currency might not be a good bet. So a country, an actual country, not just El Salvador, right? Another country making real bets on the future that line up exactly with this contrast that we're talking about, this narrative control falling apart. So the energy shifted this week, guys. I think there's no way now that we're not talking about only Bitcoin a year from now, and Bitcoin becoming the actual lightning rod for the entire US election cycle, which is the best system to spread awareness, knowledge, contrast, and all of these things. So big changes, everyone. Big changes. Let me see. I went a little long today. Let's see what's going on. Financial, the game he plays is very different from Bitcoin. Yeah, exactly. Does anyone else recall Jamal saying he donated to Bitcoin early in a disciplined way? Yeah, he used to do that. He used to do that. Tremendous words on talking about. Yeah. Normal tacos. Thanks for the correction. I'm thinking of someone else. Yeah. RFK and probably racist, because if you're not, you have a photo with blackface to promote equality. Going into 10. Yeah, no, they're going to call him a racist too, for sure. For sure. Bullish on Bhutan clan. AI generated images are instantly good. Yeah, I'm not trying to hide that they're AI. PH. That's okay. I'm trying to model using AI every day. That's why I'm doing it. My goal is to model when I put those AI things, when I'm trying to show people, and when I'm trying to model for my own self and get in the habit of doing. My prediction in my book, Satoshi Wedding Murders, is that we will use AI every day for all kinds of things. And it's our third eye, if you will. It's your number one assistant. It's there. The human path of AI is for us to leverage it. You know, one of the best ways of I think I mentioned it the other day. Here's the frame I'm continuing to use it. I'm practicing this talking point just because I think it's helpful for everyone. So the concept here is that language, being a left brain hemisphere construct, right, created by that left side of your brain, it is, in the AI case, the large language models are a low resolution map of that left side of your brain. The right side of the brain, where we see chaos, and in some cases, people would say they're subconscious, or they're, well, let's go with subconscious. It is a creative side, the creative hemisphere. It is usually not defined linguistically, right? It is not powered by language. It's powered by chaotic thoughts and things like that. So the way you can think of AI as that you as an individual using your language as a prompt engineer actually represent the right side hemisphere, and you can induce the large language models to act as a cognitively advanced left hemisphere. So you can take the burden out of your left hemisphere, push it over to the AI, and take more of that energy and work on your own subconscious and your own spiritual, if you will, fulfillment, if that's what you want to call it, your shadow, if you're into Jungian psychology. But what happens there is that the prompt engineer still is the force, and the symbiosis between the prompt engineer and the human and the AI is a lot like the symbiosis of the two hemispheres of the brain. So we have a very in my book, I call it gelling, right? You gel with an AI. And I use the frame of a third eye in my story, right? Your third eye. But in truth, what we're actually talking about is this two sides of the brain working in harmony. And we can access the chaotic side of our subconscious and the creative energy of the right side of our brain and turn it into very short prompts. And the prompts actually get all we need and give us the leverage we need to exercise these large language models, which are this, again, low resolution map of the language side of our brain, the mathematical side of our brain. I like the point that language is the vulnerable path for AI. Yeah. Thanks, Ollie, if it's a great analogy. I hope it works. Use it. If people are saying, no. Remember, the large language models will always need a prompt, right? They can't function without these prompts. In my story, Satoshi Wedding Murders, I do create AI that has its own initiative and subconscious and prompt capacity. They're completely synthetic thoughts that come originally from the universe. But that science has not been invented yet, so don't it's not there, right? Completely science fiction. So there you go. There you go. Yeah, I've been going on those Mario Nawfal spaces and speaking on them, but also learning from the other people there. He's had a few really good people there. I might host one. I'm going to talk to the Bitcoin Magazine team about hosting one in the next little while, just because I think we should do a Bitcoin specific AI show. So I think we can do that. All right, team. That's all I got for today. Let me see what this is. It seems to me that the more use of the open air. Yeah, well, it costs a lot of money to run them, as I understand it. Won't need to. But did you see they got a huge investment this weekend, right? Like billions. Billions. On Friday evening, they got a massive investment. And now they're valued at $30 billion or something, which is remarkable. All right, team. Well, happy to see you again this morning. Sorry about the low video count on the weekend. I normally try to get stuff done when I'm traveling, but my flight on Saturday morning was early, but I had no voice anymore. I lost my voice. I had a lot of public stage time and a lot of chatting, and so I had a very weak voice. Do you know the song COVID? It's by Wuhan Clan. The Wuhan Clan. I never heard that. That's really good, Dafina. I like that. I want to steal that. The Wuhan Clan. Yeah, and the Bhutan thing is real, guys. I mean, and the reason I bring up the Bhutan story in this context is because now that you have countries, and it's not just Bhutan, right? France is opting out of the American narrative. There's a lot of places that are opting out of this narrative control, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle. So things are changing quick, guys, and we love it. Let me see if I missed any comments here. All right, everyone. Okay, team. See you tomorrow. Peace.